It says in 1 Samuel chapter 8, starting in verse 1, "Now it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abijah. And they were judges in Beersheba. But his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain, took bribes, and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, Look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. So Samuel prayed to the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, Heed the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, with which they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also. Now therefore, heed their voice. However, you shall solemnly forewarn them, and show them the behavior of the king who will reign over them. So Samuel took all the words of the Lord to the people who asked him for a king. And he said, This will be the behavior of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for his own chariots and to be his horsemen, and some will run before his chariots. He will appoint captains over his thousands and captains over his fifties, and will set some to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and some to make his weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. And he will take your daughters to be perfumers, cooks, and bakers. And he will take the best of your fields, your vineyards, and your olive groves, and give them to his servants. And he will take a tenth of your grain in your vintage, and give it to his officers and servants. And he will take your male servants, your female servants, your finest young men, your donkeys, and put them to his work. And he will take a tenth of your sheep, and you will be his servants. And you will cry out in that day because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, and the Lord will not hear you in that day. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, No, but we will have a king over us, that we may also be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. And Samuel heard all the words of the people, and he repeated them in the hearing of the Lord. So the Lord said to Samuel, Heed their voice, and make them a king. And Samuel said to the men of Israel, Every man go to his city. You guys can grab a seat. I'm sure if I didn't expound on this, that you guys see as we read through this the fault, the failure of Israel and what they want, how God treats them, how God allows them to have the desires of their heart. And how if God says, and he forewarns them through Samuel, that if you have a king, if you choose your king, I should say, this is how he's going to treat you. Don't you think that if God forewarns that if they choose a king and this is what he's going to do, then that's exactly what he's going to do, right? They should have known better. And God told them. God is super gracious. Like God doesn't allow us to be ignorant. When it comes to our sin and it comes to the consequences of the things that we choose, he lets us know ahead of time, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. So we can never play the ignorant card. We can never play the blind card. We can never play the dumb card. Like, God, I did not know. In your life right now, in whatever circumstance or situation it is, you know without a shadow of a doubt what you should or shouldn't do. Because God's made these things super abundantly clear to us. I mean, Romans 1 tells us, if you remember, gosh, I don't want to butcher it, so let me turn to it. It says that, for since the creation of the world, his, speaking of God, invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Now, this excuse is in regards to that there is a God. And so he's saying that everything that is made is without excuse because it's very clear that there is a creator for its creation. He says, because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man and birds and four-footed animals and creeping things. He also tells us, I'm trying to find that verse. Oh, verse 18, before all that. He says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness." And so God says, look, you have no excuse. You know the truth, but if you ever deny the truth, or if you play the excuse card that I didn't know any better, he's saying you're lying because ultimately you know the truth, but you've suppressed it. Everyone knows. Everyone who has been alive ever in existence and everyone who is alive at this moment, all 8 billion plus people, know that there is a God. Whether they accept, like, whether they verbally say, I know or I don't know, they do. And Paul says, you're without excuse. And so God is, when it even comes to our sin, like God tells us and God shows us and reveals to us that there are consequences to it. And that if you choose to go your own way and you choose to reject God, well, this is what's going to happen. And so we can never play that card of any type of excuse. And he does the same thing here. And what that shows is God's grace. That God is gracious enough to forewarn, right? And he's gracious enough to forewarn Israel because, one, he loves Israel, right? And so if Israel is going to choose a king for themselves, he's not going to make the king bad for that purpose to allow them to have that type of consequence. But it just so happens that if they choose the king that the way they choose, they're going to choose a king who is bad. But if they would allow God to choose, then God would have chosen a good king. And we're going to see the vast difference between an earthly king ruling over man compared to God as king ruling over man. And it's like complete opposites, right? How we see with earthly man, if you see the consequences as he's forewarning them, this is what he's going to do to you. Do you see a lot of taking? He's going to take your finest this, your best that, your 10% of this. You're going to go serve him. He's going to take your sons. He's going to take your daughters. He's going to take you. You're going to go fight the war. You're going to go make him food. Do you see all that? Like, it's the king takes, an earthly king takes, but a godly king in Jesus Christ, what is it? It's the opposite, right? He gives. We see with the greatest gift and the greatest way of giving was by God sending his only son, right? John 3:16. That is the type and the way that he rules as king. He's a giver. And don't you think that that is a type of king that we would rather serve and surrender our lives to than an earthly type of king? Right? Wouldn't you agree? I mean, I do. And so in verse 1, let's pick it up there. It says, "It came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel." So Samuel, this is the end of an era, right? He's getting old. Bible tells us he's old. The people around him come up to him and be like, "Hey, dude, you're old." I'm sure that sucks to hear once you get older and you're like, you serve in youth ministry and then you get to a certain age and everyone thinks you're old, right? But me compared to I'm still not older than your parents. Like, think about that. That's crazy. But it's all relative. But for Samuel, it's not. Like, he genuinely is getting old. And just like David, when he got older, he said, "I'm about to go the way of all the earth," which is the natural way is we're all going to die, even if it's of old age. So Samuel's old. But here's this great transition here in chapter 8 from Samuel being one of the last prophets and judges that God has raised up. And now we're going to transition in chapter 8 where people are demanding a human king, which is going to set up the stage for King Saul. And so chapter 8 is this foundation for the rest of the book because we're going to see how bad of a king Saul is. And the people choose him. God did not choose him. But then we're going to see a good king. Not without his failures, but we're going to see a good king and the one that God chooses in King David. So Samuel's old. Here's this transition of leadership. He's been faithfully judging over Israel for decades. For decades. Some think that at this point he's around 65 to 70 years old. He's having a harder time of doing that circuit. Do you remember at the end of chapter 7 where it talked about him doing a circuit from one city to another to the next, 3 different cities, and then he would go home for ministry and to rest and to spend time with the Lord? Well, at some point, your age and your body, it catches up to you and you can't do stuff like that anymore. And I think that's why we see at the end of verse 1 why he sets up his sons to be judges over Israel. Because he can't do that circuit anymore. He can't go from Raleigh to Charlotte to Atlanta back to Raleigh. That's just too much. He's too old. So he's like, I'm going to hang in Raleigh and I'm going to set my sons up in Atlanta. This is the idea that we see here, as we see in verse 2, where he sets them up in Beersheba. And so I think at this point, knowing the faithfulness and knowing the character and the integrity of Samuel, that he doesn't just set up his sons to serve in this type of capacity, with this type of authority as leaders, knowing that they're bad. Would you agree with me? Like, the character and the faithfulness of Samuel makes me believe that at this point his sons are faithfully walking with the Lord, or so it would appear. Otherwise, I don't think Samuel, just for the sake of, because they're his kids, because of, what's that called when you just only choose your family for things? Nepotism. Thank you, guys. I don't think it's nepotism. Because I know Samuel. I've seen his character, and he hasn't deviated from that in his entirety of his life. Again, he's not a perfect person. We understand this, but he's been faithful. And so he doesn't have that capability, doesn't have the ability to go around. So he sets up his sons as judges over Israel. And this is important to understand too, that these men, I believe, these sons did not receive their calling or this type of leadership just because it was hereditary. Not just because they happen to be the sons of the pastor, or as we would say, the prophet or the judge that Samuel is. It truly has to be a calling by God. It cannot be because of convenience or family ties. Now, that doesn't mean that someone who is a son or daughter is automatically disqualified because they are family of one who is in leadership. The point being is that when we are given an opportunity to lead, it should be only because God has called and God has equipped, right? No other reason. No other man-made reason or idea. It shouldn't be that way. Spiritual integrity is not inherited. And we're going to see this too, because we're going to see them walk away here in verse 3. So just because your parents walk in faith doesn't mean that you automatically walk in faith, right? Just because your pastor walks in faith doesn't mean that you automatically walk in faith. It's not inherited. It's something that you have to grow in the presence of God. You yourself. Spend time with him. Talk to him. As you're doing random stuff, spend time with him. So the first son we see here, the firstborn is Joel. The second is Abijah. Joel means Yahweh is God. Abijah means Yahweh is my father. And we see here that Samuel sets them up in Beersheba. And Beersheba is the southernmost city in Israel, okay? So it's on the complete bottom part of Israel, while Dan was the northern part of Israel. And that's why anytime you hear the phrase in the Old Testament where it says that from Dan to Beersheba, it usually is describing the entirety of the land of Israel. So again, Samuel is placing them in Beersheba, right? He's allowing them to lead and minister where as far south as he can to cover more territory because he just can't travel as much anymore. And the other thing that we see with geographically with Beersheba, that it's far away from Ramah, which is what? Samuel's home base. I'm sure that's where they were born and raised. This is where Samuel goes back at the end of chapter 7, where he returns to his home. right? There he builds an altar. There's where he finds his comfort, his peace, and he builds his relationship with the Lord. It's where he finds his rest. That's where I'm sure he raised his family. And so what happens is now these young men are being sent far away from home. And what happens, this isn't always the case, but it provides more opportunity, is that there's less accountability now because there's less oversight for the person who has had authority over you for a certain amount of years. This is why we see a lot of kids who are not founded in their faith, who are not standing upon the rock by themselves, when they depart their families, that we sometimes see them struggle. We see them turn away from God. Because then it really gets challenged. Your foundation, the rock that you're upon, really gets tested. Is my faith genuine? Or is it just something that I have done and partaken in because my family has brought me to church, or we've done this at home, or whatever? And for some others, when they leave that accountability and the oversight from their parents, for some others, it really ensures and strengthens that foundation that truly is there. Right? You go off to college, you go off to work, you get married, whatever it is, and you're not falling away. You're walking stronger with the Lord because now you know for certain that this is my faith and God is strengthening it. It's a good thing. But here's the thing, you can have a God-honoring name, right? Just like Joel has this really cool name, meaning Yahweh is God. Abijah has this name, meaning Yahweh is Father. They also come from a good background, a good family. I mean, Samuel has been amazing as a prophet and a judge over Israel. But unless you personally walk with the Lord, all those things mean absolutely nothing. That's it. That's what we've talked about in these first two verses, that it has to be of your own faith and your own accord. Right? Again, spiritual heritage doesn't guarantee spiritual character. You yourself have to choose to be obedient. Your parents can give you biblical names. How many of you guys have a biblical name that's in the Bible? Half of you? I don't either. My kids do, right? They have biblical names. How many of you guys go to church? Okay. It's all of us. Most of us. Ethan doesn't. How many of you have, don't raise your hand on this one just in case, but how many of you have parents that model the faith, right? We have all these things that we see that these two sons have, right? They have biblical names, they go to church, they're raised within a Christian home, but in the end, again, you yourself must choose whether you walk with God. Remember, God only has children, he does not have grandchildren. You are not inherited into the kingdom because your parents are children of God. You yourself must make your own declaration, and you must walk by faith yourself. And so as they're sent to Beersheba, we see here in verse 3 that they did not walk in his ways. They didn't follow in the footsteps of their father. It says they turned aside after dishonest gain, and they took bribes, and they perverted justice. It is very similar to what we saw with Hophni and Phinehas, right? The two sons of Eli. Do you remember that? The difference was Eli wasn't walking in the way that Samuel was, but the turnout for their kids are the same, right? They both end up corrupt, right? They're both raised within the church, within the tabernacle, both raised by godly men, we would say. And some people, I'm not speaking to parents in here, I'm speaking to kids, but I need you to understand from a parent's perspective that sometimes we think that there is this model for how to raise our kids so that when they become adults, that there is 100% guarantee that they're going to be walking with the Lord. And I know many of good, godly parents who, well, that's not the case. Now, I do believe when the Bible says that you teach them and train them up in the way of the Lord, that the word won't return void. I truly believe that. And this is why we see a picture of the prodigal son. This is why I do see that many who have walked and strayed away, they do come back to the faith. Maybe years later, maybe decades later, but it happens. But I think the point is that for parents, there's no equation to equal this. You do what God has called you to do as a parent. You raise them up in the Lord. You model the faith as the best that you can do. But in the end, it's your own individual choice whether you're going to be obedient and walk with the Lord. I think many parents, they have strong opinions on this, and they'll say, hey, you spent too much time at church, or you didn't spend enough time at church with your kids, or maybe you didn't do enough Bible reading at home or praying, or maybe you didn't spank your kids enough. There's all these, maybe you should have homeschooled them, right? You shouldn't have sent them to public school, or man, you should have actually sent them to public school rather than homeschooling them, right? All these vast opinions. And there's no like right or wrong way other than be obedient to the Lord. And that's it. As you as parents, be obedient to the Lord, raise them up in God, and pray. And pray. Now, God had children too, right? He had Adam and Eve, and guess what they did? They rebelled. They were disobedient. And God showed grace. God covered them. Samuel's sons are bad, but guess what? His grandchildren are going to be good. We see this in 1 Chronicles chapter 6 and 31 through 34. It says this, now these are the men whom David appointed over the service of song in the house of the Lord after the ark came to rest. They were ministering with music before the dwelling place of the tabernacle of meeting until Solomon had built the house of the Lord in Jerusalem, and they served in their office according to the order. And these are the ones who ministered with their sons. Of the sons of the Kohathites were Heman, the singer, the son of Joel, the son of Samuel, the son of Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Eliel, and the son of Toa. So we see his grandchildren being faithful in worshiping and honoring and serving the Lord, that they were ministering with music before the tabernacle. How awesome is that? Now, there's been a lot of commentators that I was reading that they kind of dragged Samuel through the mud for even appointing his sons as judges over Israel. I don't think that's his fault per se, again, because I truly believe that they walked away, that they turned aside. If you see in verse 3, it says they turned aside after dishonest gain. So again, I don't think Samuel set them up in this position having already been this way. I think they were following the Lord, and then they were tempted. And then they had that position. And then they knew they could get away with stuff, and they could receive stuff through dishonest gain. Again, they were turned aside. And so they must have had some type of godly character when Samuel appointed them in this position. But again, how does this happen? Because we have to be aware of this, even if we don't have any type of position in leadership or authority, you can still be deceived, tempted, and led astray. And you yourself can turn aside by these temptations. Again, it says, what happened here? Well, they turned aside after dishonest gain, and they took bribes and they perverted justice. Well, what is it? The love of money. It was a love of money. It was a love of money. Now, even at the age of 12, 13, 17, 18, we can fall into the same temptation and the same trap. Jesus says this in Luke chapter 12, in verses 13 through 15. It says, and someone in the crowd said to Jesus, teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me. But Jesus said to him, man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter over you? And he said to them, beware and be on your guard against every form of greed. Well, this is the root of it. The love of money is greed, right? The desire for more, the desire to be wealthy. And here's the thing, it's a temptation for all, whether you have little or you have a lot. It can be very tempting when you're poor to want to be rich, right? It can be very tempting when you're rich to want more. So this is something for all of us to be aware of, that this desire, this greed. The author of Hebrews writes this in Hebrews 13:5. It says, let your conduct be without covetousness, which is the greed, but be content with such things as you have. Be content. Contentment with godliness is great gain. right? This is something that is going to help you in the long run. That you are not, when you guys decide your careers, when you get in your careers and you have your jobs and you do this and you do that, that you're not just trying to do things because you have a love for money. Is money bad? No. Is being rich bad? No. Is being poor bad? No. But the love and the greed and the lust for money is bad. And Jesus tells us that's where the root of all kinds of evil come from, is the greed for money. And this can happen within the church. This can happen outside the church. This can happen with a single person. This can happen within a family. Why can't we love money? Well, Jesus says this, Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will hold to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Mammon being money. You can't serve both. I mean, that's just logic, right? You can't have two favorite teams. It's not a good analogy, but you can't serve two gods. You will serve one and hate the other. And every single time, if you have a love for money, the money is going to out-trump, and you are going to hate and despise God. Because God is going to try to teach you, and God is going to challenge you to the opposite. He's going to teach you, just like Paul encourages us in Philippians chapter 2, verse 13, right? Or 4:13, I'm sorry. One of the most misquoted verses in all of Scripture. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. It's not for a football game. It's not for a volleyball game. It's not for this. It's not for that. Do you know what the strength is needed for? To be content, Paul says, if you read chapter 4 of Philippians. Because he says, I've learned to live, to abound and to abase. I've learned to live with a lot and to live with a little, Paul says. Because if I've learned to be content when I have a lot, then I'm not desiring and I'm not having a greed and lust for more and more and more. But he's also said, I've learned to live with little, where I'm not desiring and having a greed and lust for what I don't have. Loving money will force you to make a choice. And Paul reminds Timothy of this in 1 Timothy 6:9-10. He says, but those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness. Isn't that crazy? It says some of them have strayed from their faith, right? Because you can't serve two gods. You can't serve God, you can't serve mammon. So you stray from their faith in their greediness and pierce themselves through with many sorrows. Paul isn't condemning hard work. Hard work is something that we see through Scripture that is needed, is something that is encouraged, is something that you can be blessed by, or to be wise in your stewardship of what God blesses you financially, right? Some of you have been making money. Some of you have bank accounts. This is for you. This is for you even if you don't have any of those things, because you are going to, in a few years, have to deal with these things. So the issue here is, again, it's not hard work. It's not having money. It's not stewarding what God has given you. The issue here is desire. It's your heart, that if it's set on wealth, if it's set on more, and that's your goal, that's your ultimate goal, well, then Paul is saying, and Jesus is saying, that wealth then is your master. Money is your master, and it's not God. And it says you will fall into temptation like a snare, right? You'll fall into temptation and a snare. It's like an animal that's caught in a trap. Well, your greed, your desire is going to ensnare you, where you think, and trust me, I can speak from experience. You think that it promises freedom and it promises abundance, but in reality, it'll bind you and it'll ensnare you. And he says in verse 9, as he continues, into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men. When wealth becomes your aim, it brings about more cravings other than greed. He says many foolish and harmful lusts. It brings about pride, power, control, indulgence, these foolish things that Paul is warning us, Paul is warning us of. harmful things that destroy marriages, that destroy relationships, that destroy your soul. Because he says it drowns men in destruction and perdition. But then he says in verse 10 in 1 Timothy chapter 6, he says, "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil." And this is where we have to be careful in how we read this and we see the right wording. It's not that money is the root of all evil, right? It's the love of money. So again, being rich is not bad. If God has blessed you with giftings and skills, maybe you hit the jackpot, right? And you win millions of dollars. It's not a bad thing. To have a lot of money is not a bad thing, because hopefully that you will then be that cheerful giver that God describes us to be, and use the resources that we have to further his kingdom and bless others who don't have as much. So again, it's the love, the desire, the greed, the love of it that is bad. Money is just a thing. It's just an object. It's literally nothing to God. There's one time in Scripture that God says, "Test me." Did you know that? Every other time it says, "Don't tempt me, don't test me." But there's one time that God says, "Test me." And you know what he wants you to test him in? Trying to outgive him. Trying to outgive him. He says, "Test me. Try to outgive me." Because money is nothing to God, and he will over and abundantly outgive us. And this is where faith comes into play when it comes to finances. This is where faith comes to play when it comes to giving. To giving what you have, giving a tithe unto the Lord, and to do it with a cheerful heart, to be a cheerful giver. I don't do it because the church needs it. I don't do it because God needs it. I do it because, one, God has challenged me and required me to do it, and it is a testing and a step of my faith, whether I trust in the God of money or the God of my soul. Because sometimes it can be much easier to trust in what I can control and what I hold and what I can see, and that's money. But if I am willing and able to give up that for the Lord, then it shows that I have a faith that he can keep me and he can hold me. And guess what? We find out too is that God, again, he outgives us. And so ironically, in some way or another, even when I give unto the Lord, he is still providing enough for me to provide for my family, to get us a car so that we can get from one place to another. We may not have two cars, but that's okay. At least we have one so that we can share it and we can pick each other up and go here and go there. I have a roof over my head, right? God has abundantly blessed. And I think you guys can say the same. And again, God to God, money is nothing. But money can be. It can be either a blessing or a curse. It becomes a curse when it rules our hearts and we make it God. We make it become idolatry. He says it leads to a root of all kinds of evil. It's not the root of all evil, but a root that produces many different kinds of evil. Because we know that the greed and the love, it brings about lying, cheating, stealing, oppression, exploitation, murder. How many times do we see the reason people do things is because of money? When I say do things, I mean things that they typically would never do, that they follow the lust of their heart rather than to walk in integrity. You know how many times it can be tempting to, have you guys ever been tempted to steal something? I have. I have stolen something before. I don't know. Can't remember, but I know I have. I'm trying to think. Gosh, this was last week. What did I do? I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. But there is that temptation, and I can't come up with an example. But I know that in your life there's been situations, and it's not just stealing, but there's been situations where it has tested your integrity when it comes to money. Right? When it comes to money. So I'll give you one example. Today, it was actually today. My dad sent me money through Venmo, to pay for something because I paid for all of it and we were going to split it because I was going to take half, he was going to take half. Does this make sense? Well, guess what? I came to find out that I didn't actually need to pay for that thing, and I never did pay for that thing. So it ended up being free, but I still had that money from my dad. But he never knew that I didn't pay for that thing. Does this make sense? So I could have just kept that money and never told him, and he all along would have just thought that I actually did pay for that thing and he just gave me half of it. But I would have just pocketed 50%. So I'm caught in a dilemma here. Do I walk in integrity, or do I submit and surrender to the love of money? What do you think I did? Obviously, I'm telling you this, so I did the right thing, right? I I sent it back to my dad. Okay, you can go on my Venmo and see I sent it back to him, right? But that's the idea here. There's many different ways and many different times where Satan is going to tempt you with these things, and your flesh will be tempted by these things, and you have to choose the God that you want. Am I going to choose the God of money, or am I going to walk in integrity and in good character and in faith and trust the living God? And he says, test me because I can outgive you. He says, I can outgive you. But if you are going to serve these things, he says, it's going to lead to a lot of different kinds of evil. And the evil that will lead some away from the faith. It pulls people away from Christ. Now think of the greatest example here is Judas, a disciple of Jesus Christ, one of the 12. And what caused him to stray away from Jesus? Hear me out, guys. Judas literally walked with the Son of God. For 3 years, in every minute of every day, he wasn't like you and I, where when we see godly men and we see them for 30 minutes, we're like, oh yeah, they're holy. But if you spend time with them day in and day out, you're going to see that they become irritated, grumpy, they don't get enough sleep. And you're like, oh, they're just like me. But with Jesus, that's not the case. He was perfect. So he was faithful. He was kind. He was loving. Every day of every minute of all 3 years that Judas was with him. And Judas saw this. Judas heard him speak, saw him perform miracles, and guess what? Yet he himself still strayed from the faith. Because of what? Money. The love of money. The love of money. It says it pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Wealth, it can promise happiness, and we think that it provides the things that it provides, but really what happens is we end up enslaved to it and wounded and hurt, broken, and sometimes even dead. My family's been really into, well, they have been for a while, but I started watching it a little bit more. Little House on the Prairie. You guys ever watch that? So there was an episode, it's called The Richest Man in Walnut Grove. You guys ever seen that episode? So like at that point, the father, Charles Ingalls, right? He's got 3 kids, 3 little girls. They're not very rich people. I don't know, when is this set? In the 1400s? Like they're po. They can't afford the R, right? That's how poor they are. He's losing his wheat crop. He can't pay his debts, right? He's working exhaustively, a ton of labor just to provide for his family. Like they start to go without the simplicity of things like different types of food and sugar and this and that. You got to watch it. It's pretty cool. Anyways, all these things start to happen, and by the world's standards, even maybe by our standards, we'd be like, these guys are really poor. They are not wealthy. Well, in a literal financial sense, yes, they may have been poor, but the point of that whole episode is to reveal a deeper truth that really they are the richest family in town. Why? Because their wealth was measured beyond the money, and it was measured by their love, their respect, and the unity that they had. And even by his faith and his character and his integrity, because even he, the father, now imagine being a father and you can't provide for your family, you would be tempted to do some illegal things just to provide your family, right? This is like ethics 101 that you would take in college. I took a class on this, and it was like, the question was, would you steal bread to feed your family, right? Well, it's a question of ethics. I mean, you think I love my family, they're the most important thing. I don't want them to die because I can't feed them. So, yeah, I would just steal something to feed. Well, no. What if we can walk in faith and we don't lose and compromise our integrity even in hard times? And this is the example of that episode because he refuses to compromise. And so there's one point in it where one of the characters says to him, "You are the richest man in Walnut Grove." Because he realizes that the one who is actually the richest in that town did not have any of the things that this man had. Did not have a family, did not have love, did not have integrity, did not have joy, did not have all the contentment. And so he realizes that Charles is the richest man, the most wealthiest man there. And so I want to encourage you and challenge you with this because we got to end. Do I long for wealth more than I long for Jesus? And am I tempted to compromise integrity for gain, for money? Ask yourselves these questions, and I'm sure these things will come up in different situations in your life and maybe even sometime soon. But be careful, because these things can lead to destruction. But God is a good and great giver. He will outgive you. Trust in Him. Put your faith in Him when it comes to these things. And we're going to see as we pick it up next week um, how these bribes and dishonest gain and how it's going to lead Israel and what's going to happen with Samuel and the rest of the story.